Hey friends, I'm Veronica from Chacan Ranch, and today I wanted to share all of my essential tools for making sourdough bread. First of all, definitely a sourdough starter. This is the heart of your bread, and without it, you don't need any other tools. So I always recommend to buy a mature sourdough starter in your local area, or online a dehydrated version. But if you want to make your own, you can. It's just going to take longer. It's going to take a lot more flour, and you're going to have to wait a little while until it becomes mature to make really good bread. So that's why I always recommend to buy. But if you want to make your own, you can. And I will have a link on the bottom how you can make your own sourdough starter from scratch. You obviously need a jar to keep your starter in. I like just the large mouth mason jar. That works really well for me. Bread flour. This is amazing. I used to use all-purpose flour in the beginning and the bread was okay. When I switched to bread flour, my bread went from like 50 to 100%. So I always recommend King Arthur. It's got 12.7% protein content, which is great for gluten forming in your bread, and it's going to give it more of a rise. It's going to become more elastic and just a better dough in bread in general. So highly recommend King Arthur. I know Bob's Red Mill is good too. I use that once in a while. Another thing is white rice flour. This stuff is amazing. You dust your proofing basket with it, and then you dust your bread with it so it won't stick to anything else that you don't want it to stick to. Definitely a kitchen scale. This is a must-have. My bread recipe, I do have a measuring cup version. It's easier and more accurate with the kitchen scale, so I highly recommend doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a simple kitchen scale. A mixing bowl. I always recommend a glass mixing bowl, but I do use my KitchenAid mixing bowl quite a bit as well. I love using this bowl because as soon as the dough is on the very top, I know that the bulk fermentation is complete. So just when you get a bowl, it's useful to have it not so wide, but more up so you can see when your bread is done bulk fermenting. Proofing basket. Highly recommend this. There's different shapes and sizes. Obviously, I only have one and I always use it. This is perfect for my Dutch oven size. And so there's more of an oval one. There's a different size, like a smaller one to make smaller loaves. And this is very helpful. Another thing is parchment paper. I love parchment paper. And if you ever run out of parchment paper, I have this on hand. It's a bread sling. I don't always use it, but I have it on hand just in case I run out of parchment paper. And then you can just always throw your bread on here, pop it in the Dutch oven, and it's gonna make good bread. Bread lame. I don't have a bread lame. I use razor blades. So I highly recommend having a box of razor blades. They will last you for a long time. This is my number one thing that I always recommend, especially for beginners. You're going to want to bake your bread in a Dutch oven. The oven spring will be amazing in there, and it's just easier for beginners instead of the open bake. You can also use a bread loaf pan if you're making like a sandwich bread. It's nice to have that on hand. And then of course a bread knife with a cutting board. A wooden spoon. I like to mix my initial dough with a wooden spoon, so that's been helpful. And then another trick that I learned was when I am feeding my sourdough starter, sometimes I use a chopstick to just stir it all in this jar without taking it out. And that way you can just get in the corners and everywhere, and it mixes really well. So chopstick for your sourdough starter. And that's it. That's all of my top essential tools and items that I always recommend for beginners. Thank you for watching.